Good morning, 23rd Sunday of Ordinary Time, and we read the Gospel of Mark. Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Effetá, which means, be open. At this, the man's ears were open, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. A few years ago, my family organized a big lunch with the extended family, uncles, cousins, grandchildren, and we were about 45 or 50 people. My uncle, rest in peace, was already suffering from cancer and had his thyroid removed, making it very difficult for him to speak out loud. In addition, he was also suffering from a progressive decline of his hearing. I noticed that although he was sitting at the table with his siblings around him, he was unable to participate in the conversation, neither listening nor speaking, and had isolated himself with his gaze lost in infinity. I think he felt lonely. I imagine that being deaf and at the same time mute makes you feel very lonely because it's difficult for you to relate to others and for them to relate to you. Little by little, you feel more and more isolated, more lonely, and therefore sadder because you can share almost nothing with anyone. Jesus rescues this man from loneliness, from sadness, from isolation. He gives him back the possibility of relating to others. Today's Gospel tells us about the healing of a deaf mute. Jesus leaves the area of Tyre and Sidon, a Canaanite area heavily influenced by Greek culture, and crosses the region of the Decapolis, southeast of Lake Galilee. Jesus apparently designs this route to avoid the Galilee district. The last time he had been in Decapolis, Jesus was jeered, the crowd begged him to leave, but he told the healed man to tell his friends what God had done for him. Apparently that person's testimony worked out well and softened the hearts of many local people, and this time they were much more receptive and bring a deaf mute to Jesus. Jesus takes this deaf man to a private place, perhaps so that he would not be overwhelmed by so much noise once his hearing returned. People led the man to Jesus, which would be an intercessory prayer. We can lead our friends and in their needs to Jesus in prayer, but what Jesus does is creating an intimate experience between God and the one in need of healing. It's up to us to bring the person and his needs to Jesus, but what happens next is no longer our business. It's the action of God and the openness or disposition of the person. Jesus worked miracles as he wished and when he wished, sometimes in front of everyone and sometimes in secret. He puts the man with the paralyzed hand in the middle of the synagogue and heals him in full view of everyone so that everyone can see him. He puts the bleeding woman in evidence in front of the crowd. This time, he takes apart the sick man so that no one can see him. I believe that doing good is a polychromy. It has many tonalities, many colors. There is not only one and unique way to do good. Sometimes it's necessary to do it openly, to communicate it, to let people know about it, and sometimes maybe not. Sometimes it's better if it remains the secret of a few. He also changes the way he heals. On other occasions, Jesus doesn't seem to get personally involved, as with the daughter of the Syrophoenician woman, whom he heals from a distance. To others, he tells them to go to have a bath in the river, and on the way, he heals them. With this deaf mute, Jesus gets involved in a very personal way, accompanies him far from the crowd, and even touches him with his own saliva. Jesus loved everyone in the same way, but he didn't interact with everyone in the same way. He knew what each one needed in particular. Like those parents with several children who, although they love all equally, each one is treated according to his needs. The deaf person's healing is complete and instantaneous. It's not progressive, nor does it leave him simply somehow a little bit better in his hearing. It heals him completely. At Cana of Galilee, Jesus not only made wine so that the wedding feast would not be ruined, but with a low-cost wine. He made a type of wine that the groom could never have afforded. In the same way, Jesus has completely healed the deaf man, not just well enough to communicate, but completely healed. The same is true for God's forgiveness. It's not that God half forgives more or less, but that He completely forgives. Suffering and sickness really is a mysterious thing. Jesus doesn't want it for us. But here we can see how a sad situation can become an occasion of grace. We see that the deaf mute, after the healing, rejoices. Is he rejoicing only for hearing and speaking again? Or is there also a deeper joy? Perhaps we can imagine him thinking, "Blessed deafness. Thanks to it, I've had a personal encounter with Jesus. If I hadn't had this illness, I wouldn't have had such a greater encounter with Christ." Although at first it's very difficult for us to see it in such a way, good things come into our lives as a result of hard times. For example, Beethoven composed the hymn to joy of the 9th Symphony when he was completely deaf. Suffering can make us stronger, and strength can become our gift to others. Most of the time, Jesus tells the newly healed to keep quiet or to present themselves only to the priest so that the temple priest will verify their healing. Normally, Jesus doesn't want the people he heals to proclaim what he has done, because physical healing is not his primary mission. This makes me think of two implications for today. First, we must be careful on how we proclaim Jesus. If we don't get it right, if we portray him as something that he is not, we can end up damaging people's faith. And secondly, discretion in doing good. By discretion here, I mean not boasting or bragging about the good that is done. Recently, I read a newspaper article that talked about voluntourism, a word formed by the union of volunteering and tourism. The practice of disguising as volunteer action what in truth is a tourist trip. Pretending is something that predominates in social networks. Going to underdeveloped places to take the photo, the typical one with the smiling children, to say that we have been helping and share it all on Instagram. Whether he did miracles in secret or in front of the crowd, Jesus was not a volunteerist. He did good to people without seeking personal recognition or fame. Charity is its own reward. And God bless you.